let people in. Good morning, everybody that's joining us. We will just give everybody a minute or so to come on in. If you can hear and see myself, Darren, and Lee, and Rowan's still image there, if you can just drop a note in chat to let us know that you can hear us and we're coming through loud and clear, that would be great. No, nobody saying anything yet. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Can you hear us okay? Perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. So we're coming through, which is all good. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so and we will get started. So thank you to everybody for joining us this morning. I hope everybody's had all of the storm rain and everything else that they're due to get, and now enjoying bright sunshine again, given it is still August. Right, I think we will get started. I'm sure there'll be some late stragglers. Let me close that window for a moment. We're recording. Share a screen. Present. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. For those that don't know me, my name is Will Farnell. I'm the founder of Farnell Clark and also co-founder of App Advisory Plus. For the last 7 months or so, we've been running an App of the Month webinar, and I'm delighted that this month, sunny August, we have Soldo joining us. And I'm joined this morning by Darren Upson and Lee Stallard. Good morning, guys. Do you want to just give a very brief introduction of yourself? Darren, do you want to go first as you first on the screen?
Sure. So hi, everyone. So I'm VP Small Business Europe at Soldo, which means I'm responsible for the small business channel. Soldo is a spend management solution that helps to automate the expense management cycle. My responsibility there is to drive growth for the small business channel, so companies up to 50 employees. We have 2 primary channels, the online channel via our website and also via accountants and bookkeepers as well. So the purpose of the session today is really to give everyone a bit of an overview of what it is we do, the problems we solve for, and how our prepaid MasterCards help automate the expense cycle from payment to reconciliation.
Thanks, Darren. Lee.
Morning, everyone. How you doing? I'm Lee. I'm one of the account managers at Soldo. I look after our accounting and bookkeeping partners and help them try and get the best out of using Soldo for their clients and have benefits for the clients and for the practice as well.
Great, excellent. Thanks, guys. And I know both of you fairly well and have done for some time. You've both been around the accounting software space for some time. So I'm sure there's lots of really interesting insights you're going to be able to share with us this morning. So the plan, everybody, we are going to be wrapped up for 10:30 or as close to as we possibly can. If you do have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A tab. Rowan is in the background and will be monitoring those for us. Any that he can answer, he will do as we go through. But equally, we'll have some time, I'm sure, at the end to pick up any questions you have. So what are we going to cover? I'm really looking forward to this session. Unless you've been hiding under a rock, which is kind of pretty difficult, everybody knows that we've been through a tough economic environment, and the nature of what Soldo does means that as an organization, Soldo have got some really interesting insights into what's been happening with spending patterns during the course of lockdown, and we're going to chat through some of those, because I think I know what some of the stuff that Darren and Lee are going to talk about, and it's quite surprising. And if the things that they're going to talk about are going to be an ongoing approach to how spending is undertaken, we as accountants have got to look at that and work out how we adapt our systems, our processes to support clients to manage this change in approach. So we're going to look into that. We're going to talk about how we manage those challenges, how helping clients understand their spending and control their spending can start to give us opportunities to have conversations that can lead to a variety of advisory opportunities. And we're going to talk about Soldo's technology and how it underpins that and where it fits in the app stack. And that's a really interesting one. It's one of the things that resulted in App Advisory Plus being born in the first place, in terms of when you start connecting a number of different apps together, how do they work? Where's the overlap, and how do we manage that overlap? So it's going to be really interesting to get the guys' perspectives on that. So that's the plan. Before we do that, Darren, do you want to just you gave a little bit in the introduction there, but just give a brief overview of what Soldo really is?
Sure. So Soldo is, so fundamentally we're a prepaid MasterCard solution, which means that Soldo cards are given to employees and departments in an organization. You can set rules and budgets up in terms of how how money can be spent within your organization. So if you think about the incumbent solution in most organizations, what you're going to have is you're going to have a mixture of reimbursable expenses, shared company credit cards, petty cash, and various other methods of payments. What Soldo does is it consolidates all of that into one prepaid card that can be handed to individual employees and, as I say, departments as well. Now, the benefit there is that as soon as you make a purchase using Soldo, then you get a notification on the app to photograph the receipt. You categorize the expense based on the nominals in either Xero or QuickBooks Online. And that information then feeds seamlessly into the accounting platform, along with the photograph of the receipt, the categorization, and so on and so forth as well. So what we're really trying to do is streamline the entire process, as I say, from payment all the way through to reconciliation. We are the payment solution. We're also the software platform that drives the integration with the core accounting platform too. And Soldo can be used with absolutely any accountancy platform out there. The initial cab off the rank for us was Xero, and we were the first expense app globally to have a bank feed integration with Xero. So that's very mature. It's incredibly solid. We've got a integration with QuickBooks Online, and we're doing some more work there to launch a bank feed integration with them too. And we can integrate through CSV to absolutely any other accountancy platform as well. Founded in 2015, we built we are the bank, so we're the e-money institution, and we're the software platform as well. So we don't rely on anyone else's technology now. Yeah, we are the market leader by some way in the small business space in the UK and also other parts of Europe as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. Right, so I'm really interested to get into this topic. So COVID, we've had COVID lockdown. My lights have gone out. We've had COVID lockdown. Of course, my guess in this, certainly the conversation that we had when we were talking about what we're going to talk about today, is that will surely everybody just stop spending, right?
Well, you think that. So let me set some context around this. So if we look at the types of spending that take place within small businesses, and certainly within the Soldo platform, a lot of people expect that all the solutions like ours do is cover the employee expenses. So typically the travel, the entertainment, the hotel, the planes, trains, automobiles type of activities and client lunches. The reality is, historically, we would always have around a kind of like a 55-45 split in terms of the actual type of spending that takes place between employee expenses and what we call business spending instead. And business spending is made up of things like, your subscription to Xero, for example, your Facebook advertising, your Slack subscription, so on and so forth, and also AWS and your other apps and critical business systems type spending. So what we saw when the lockdown happened, very rarely do we see an economy basically get switched off overnight. And that's exactly what happened when lockdown started. And so with everyone in lockdown, that no employees were spending any money. So the drop off in terms of spend that we saw came from the employee expenses rather than actually coming from business spending overall. But what it actually demonstrated to us is that we actually saw a massive increase in terms of spend on the company related expenses instead. So, you know, with everyone working from home, companies scrambling to actually implement the right solutions to mean that their employees could actually be able to do their job and fulfill their role from when working remotely. So, you know, big increase in the spend on things like Zoom, big increase on spending on money, on spending things like Slack, and also Teams, Office 365, and other web apps as well to mean that organizations can actually continue to operate. But what we also saw, and what we've seen continuing to happen, is an increase in e-commerce purchases. So e-commerce purchases through like Amazon or you know, some of the other platforms, to actually enable their employees to continue to do their work remotely. Also, you know, payments of things like, you know, post office, postage and things like that have started going, more of that's started going through the Soldo platform too. So a lot of these critical business processes where organizations would have been reliant on petty cash, the shared company credit card that sits behind the directors or sits in the director's drawer, you know, that type of thing. That's what's happened. We've seen a big shift away from that. And actually what we've seen is companies are actually now spending more post-COVID, although we're still in COVID, but they're spending more now than they were before overall at an account level, which we never expected to see.
Yeah, and is this then a move to much more decentralized spending?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. We talk about empowerment in terms of the ability for companies to enable their employees to spend in a more responsible manner, and that's exactly what's happening now. What organisations are doing is the control is being passed to the employees, but actually with guardrails on. So one of the things is, it's a scary thing for a business to say, okay, go and spend like drunken sailors. No one wants to instruct their employees to go and spend money like that. But actually what you can do with solutions like Soldo is you can set these budgets and rules to make sure that people can only spend what they're permitted to spend. So it's not like giving somebody a credit card with like a 20 grand limit on it. They can go only spend what they're actually what they're able to spend on that particular card. And if they try and spend outside of the rules, the card is just rejected. So it's a nice way to set those parameters to make sure that employees are spending in a way that befits their role in an organization.
Yeah, and that kind of highlights already some of the kind of the risks associated with this in terms of the second bullet point on the agenda, which is if we recognize that there is, let's call it decentralized spending, for example, where before it's like in our office here, some of our team would say, hey, I need to pay my AAT membership, I need to pay for my ACCA membership. Can I have the card? And that, I mean, I'm ashamed to say it, Darren, but that's kind of, we'd give them the cards and they'd go and pay their subscription. If we're all working from home, we can't do that. So that's point one. Or you've got to send somebody the message, or you've got to use their login to log in and make their payment. We're opening up to risks here, aren't we?
Well, I mean, so, and even in a normal environment, I mean, so we've got some large accountancy firms that use Soldo extensively in their own business. And what they do is they've moved away from a couple of shared company credit cards to individual Soldo cards being issued out to employees. But the whole reason why they've done that is because the pain in the backside for them every month was, okay, we've got these two company credit cards. They've been used around the organisation, in which we're playing the great receipt hunt in terms of who's spent what where. Yeah, so every month the email went around to all members of staff saying, right, I've got an expense on here for this amount. Who first of all, who spent it, and do you have the paperwork to support this? Which is just it's ridiculous in 2020.
Yeah, and I'm sure that many of the people listening in here are well aware of the issues just with a straightforward credit card for a one-man limited company, and the challenge of getting the receipts there when you start looking at 20 people using the same card. It just compounds the whole complexity of the issue. So what's changed? I mean, Lee, this may be one for you. You're on the cold face talking to accounting firms. What are the new challenges? What are the things that you're hearing and you're seeing in terms of how firms are managing this changing risk?
I think cash flow's always central to those sorts of conversations, isn't it? Because it's critical before COVID, and it's even more so now that the nature of spending has changed. And so it's one of the biggest demands that I'm seeing firms are hearing from their clients in terms of how do we manage this. For example, you've got COVID loans are going to start to need to be repaid in a year or so. You've got furlough coming to an end. And so while a lot of people may think that some of the cash flow struggles are sort of behind us, there's actually some really big landmines coming up. So those are some of the bigger challenges. But you've got accountants really scrambling to keep up with everything else that they need to do as well. And we've got, audits pushed back. And so you're just seeing these really lumpy parts of workflow for firms. So it's difficult, I think, for them to be able to sit down and think, right, how are we going to deliver more insights? Darren and I were chatting earlier on about the kind of dynamic nature that's required by businesses to thrive. Like we were talking about the idea that those businesses that noticed that online advertising spend had decreased in cost and capitalized on that and started using that sort of avenue to grow their business when they'd changed or pivoted their services or whatever, have really thrived, and those that haven't, they've struggled a little bit more. And so there's this need for organizational agility, isn't there? Even for small businesses, that they need to be able to almost turn on a sixpence and adapt when things come their way. And if you don't know what's going on with the business, if you haven't got the insights, and it's really difficult to do that from either an advisor or a business owner perspective. And so the first ingredient, I think, has got to be capturing that information and making sure that you know what your liabilities are at any given point.
Yeah. And so, I mean, if we've seen lots of, everybody's talking about what happens once we get out of kind of lockdown to whatever degree we're in terms of the work environment. So are people going to stay working from home? Are people going to all come back into the office? And everybody seems to be kind of falling into the middle and saying, hey, we're going to do hybrid. It's going to be really interesting to see how that all unfolds. But if we accept that there is an element of hybrid that's more weighted to work from home, it does create challenge, doesn't it, for how businesses are going to control spending. And the obvious thing in the pre-Soldo type solution world would be, let's order a load of corporate credit cards. Let's go and order a load of Barclays cards or whatever, and people that need them can have a credit limit on the card. What are the obvious risks here? What can we do as accountants to kind of help manage this process for our clients, other than, of course, kind of suggest that people look at solutions like Soldo? What is it that Soldo is going to do that's going to reduce the risks for our clients, and in turn, how Soldo going to help us manage those risks for our clients?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, one of the important things to flag on this is the fact that credit is going to be harder to come by for a lot of businesses in the post-COVID era versus pre. So when we talk about companies getting a load of Barclays cards or whatever it might be for all of their employees, I mean, that was an unusual situation pre-COVID. It's going to be even more unusual in a post-COVID environment. The other challenge associated with that is it's actually very difficult to set the limits in a structured way that means that actually you don't expose yourself to a significant amount of risk associated with liabilities and various other things, because the reality of the situation for credit cards in general is the fact that you are effectively giving every employee a loaded gun. They can go and spend what they can spend based on the limits on the card, which are normally quite generous limits. So there's an inherent risk associated with the control wrapped around that, which is a concern for a lot of companies. Don't get me wrong, a lot of companies still that use Soldo still use company credit cards as well. But what they'll do is those company credit cards are restricted for senior executives in those organizations, and they're being used for specific applications in those companies. So typically what you wouldn't necessarily see is you wouldn't see, right, okay, we're going to get rid of all of our company credit cards and we're going to get all Soldo or any other type of spend management type cards. What you have is a blend between the two, with the majority of the employees having a Soldo card, because fundamentally it's like giving your employee like their laptop. You give them a Soldo card so they can do their job, and you set the guardrails on that as well. So being able to package up the limits and restrictions on those cards sets the foundation, I think, that means that organizations don't expose themselves to that level of risk that they potentially would do with a credit card. Yeah. So that's one of the key parts.
Okay. Yeah, and I think the other side of that is that some businesses wouldn't necessarily expose themselves to that sort of risk. They just wouldn't give the flexibility in the first place because the risk is too great. They wouldn't give them the card to, say, a new starter to go and get themselves their laptop. When you're in the kind of an uncertain environment, the command and control structure of business makes things a lot harder. You've got to decentralize and let people have more flexibility. Yeah. And so where we can start solving some of those problems and helping kind of balance that risk against flexibility is just by knowing there's a solution there to these things. You know, I think some people will be sat there thinking, well, the only option I've got is a credit card. I've got to do it. And now my new staff member needs to go through a credit check and we need to figure out what limit to give them. And we just got to go through this burden. Yeah. The first part is awareness that there's a better way to deal with it, you know, like things like an online or a virtual card that we can set up. That means that you can just give somebody the card numbers and they can use the card and it's maxed out at $1,000 and they can go and get their Mac and that's it. You know, they're not gonna get into any strife.
Yeah. So it's I think we'll move on to some of the other topics here, but I think to summarize is we've got a changing dynamic in terms of the way that organizations are going to be physically structured, which in turn creates challenges for how they steady their lead.
Yeah. New office chair on my Soldo card, I think.
So we've got this new dynamic of physical setup of organizations, and then overlaying that creates challenges for how people are able to get hold of the things they need to do their job effectively when they're not in the office 5 days a week, to be able to have a conversation with somebody and say, can I have this? And there are better tools to help us manage those. And we're all accountants, we'll all remember the conversations around the importance of internal control. And fundamentally, that's what we're talking about here, isn't it? We're helping our clients manage those internal controls around how they spend money, how those decisions are made, and how it's processed. So that's great, really interesting. And as I say, I was fascinated when we first had the conversation that spend went up during COVID, when I just assumed, hey, nobody would use their Soldo cards because it's like, well, they're not going anywhere.
And the really promising thing is actually what we're now seeing is with lockdown restrictions being eased, a lot of that spending is actually coming back. So if we look at July over June, there's a 41% increase in actual spend month on month. And actually the real dip we saw was April in terms of the employee type spending or the expense related activities. So we are seeing a recovery there in terms of the existing customer base. So that's really promising, the fact that actually that things are recovering, but we don't expect things to be ever returned back to the way it was pre-COVID.
Cool. And Lee, I think we touched on it a bit when you talked about the cash flow stuff. So one of the things we said is that there's an opportunity to use conversations with clients around controlling spend to open a door to other advisory conversations. How do you see that playing out? How are firms that you're working with doing that right now?
Well, what they're able to do is speak to the client about the whole cash flow process. And whilst that usually comes down to getting debts paid quicker, looking at invoice factoring or getting more money in, the reality is that the part of the process that you've got 100% control of is what money you're allowed to go out. And so a conversation with a client about building a better infrastructure and some better controls and processes about managing that money flowing out is a really central part of getting your cash flow right.
Yeah.
And so where firms tend to struggle in in offering new things to clients is when it's a very different style conversation, right? You've got accountancy firms are very, very good and very efficient at going through a repeating process. So you'll follow the file from last year, for example. If you then go and start saying to some middle managers, right now you've got to talk about cash flow and what their cash flow is going to look like in 3 months, very difficult. Where that becomes easier is if you can talk about spend, where you're already looking at comparative spend when you're looking at analytical review. So you've already got people that are used to that process. So all you need to do is tweak that and start to share some of those insights with clients, and you can start having a very valuable spend conversation that can then contribute to a broader cash flow conversation.
Yeah.
So operationally, that's much, much easier to do. And where Soldo can help with that is that, for example, if you notice that a particular type of spending tends to be higher or they lose control of it, you can actually just create a pot of ring fence money for that type of expense, and make sure proactively they don't spend beyond that. You know, of course, if you're looking back over budget compared to actual for the last quarter, well, you're only going to know if you've gone over once that's happened, right? Because then they're on the report. If you've got that money ring fence and you control how much is available on each month, then actually you're doing much more proactive spend management. So there's a really high value service, I think, for clients there that people are starting to look at, but actually doesn't require a huge departure in terms of existing processes. So that's a really good place to start in terms of starting to just get a toe in the water in that advisory conversation, which is such a challenge.
Cool. Excellent. And you guys are doing some stuff with some webinar series with Fluidly at the moment as well, aren't you? So if people want to kind of look at in a bit more depth around this idea of kind of spend management and how that impacts on cash flow, then I think there's 4 to go, isn't there? So people, I'm sure, get access to the one that they've missed. Excellent. So final point before we kind of go to key takeaways and any questions. Where does Soldo fit in the financial app stack for a firm? And it's if they're using Xero QuickBooks, they're using Receipt Bank Auto Entry or one of those tools. Where does Soldo fit? And have you seen challenges? How are people making it work within their own core app stack?
So I think one of the things that's important to flag here is the fact that we are the financial service institution, but we're not trying to be the bank. Okay, so what we do is we work in conjunction with an existing business bank account. So typically the way that it works in terms of flow is you would move like a month to a month and a half worth of float onto Soldo, which is effectively your spend money account. And then that becomes your almost like your expense or current account that you're using on an ongoing basis to actually spend money. So you don't need to replace your existing business bank account with Soldo, but what you're doing is you're layering a best-in-class fintech on top of a traditional bank account typically, which means that you don't need to move a client off of their existing bank account, but you still get all of the benefits associated with a best-in-class fintech. We talk about our product being a multi-user platform as well. So it's really about, where we fit best for an organization is not so much for a sole trader. And actually most sole trader requirements are dealt with from solutions like Starling or Tide or Revolut or whatever it might be. Those solutions are a great fit for sole traders because they actually are an end-to-end bank account for a business. But the majority of businesses don't want to move to a neobank. And actually most of those solutions are not really designed for a scaling business. Can we scale from anything from a couple of employees up to thousands and everything in between? When we look at the financial app stack overall, though, we work. For us, you've got your single source of the truth, which is your accounting platform. Then Soldo is as I say your spend money account for your employees and for departments within your organization as well. And then you've got other solutions like cash flow forecasting and various other things like that sit on top of that as well. But we don't replace Receipt Bank, and Receipt Bank doesn't replace us. It's a complementary solution that sits alongside the two different offerings, because I think it's really important for everyone to understand that when we talk about this app stack overall, first of all, what we prefer to focus on rather than what is the solution, it's what is the pain that the organization is facing, and therefore what do they need solved and how do the different apps out there solve those particular issues. So for us, it's more about actually if an organization needs to make payments, and they want to set controls around those payments, then Soldo is a phenomenal proposition for that. And actually the fact that it's got best-in-class integrations to different accounting platforms as well means that actually you're automating a load of the admin associated with capture and also the payment processing as well. So it's a really simple proposition that's very easy to use, that ultimately pushes all that money and all the information across into the accounting platform.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. Right, let's
just to build on that, if I could, just second. Well, there's quite a lot of versatility in terms of where Soldo can be used, and so we've already talked about that, the cash flow process and how it could fit into the app stack as part of the kind of cash flow puzzle. But we're also seeing firms starting to use it to say, well, look, I could go to a client from a business development perspective and say to a new potential client, look, if you raise your invoices in Xero and spend all your money in Soldo, then we've got most of the bookkeeping data captured. And for the client, that's a very low friction way to do their bookkeeping. So we're seeing firms starting to do some really innovative and interesting things around creating a great client experience with these tools as well. So yeah, just in terms of offering another level of where it can be used in the app stack, it's great for the firm from that perspective too.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Darren, do you want to run us through these key takeaways to wrap up before we check whether we've got any?
Yeah, so I think the first one's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, when we talk about cash flow cycle, actually the spending part is one thing that businesses have complete control on. So, you know, this is an area that you can proactively manage without actually having any form of dependencies in your organization. Business spending has changed significantly since the start of lockdown. We mentioned that earlier. We expect it to continue to change and morph as time goes on. So the ability to be agile and adjust your strategy in the way in which you're spending money needs to be, it's a very fluid environment. And actually, I think it will continue to be that way for some time. Employee expenses, they're the second biggest cost of business after salaries. This is a well-known stat, and actually it's a really interesting one when we look at it, because employee expenses are one thing that actually, there's a distinct lack of control associated with those employee expenses. And at the moment as well, the challenge is a lot of companies are still reliant on an organization, on their employees to bankroll the business, and that's going to become more problematic as time goes on. 1.9 billion pounds of expense fraud in the UK every year that could be avoided. You know, from a situation where you have people buying a new bathroom on their expenses or their company credit card, all the way through to buying other choice items and holidays, because only about 1% of the expense reports in most businesses are ever actually checked. Which is a major issue. Reimbursable expenses, company credit cards, petty cash, they're just not fit for a cashless society. And, you know, with a distributed workforce. So, you know, there are better solutions out there, and Soldo, along with some of the other solutions in our space, are much better than the incumbent solutions. As Lee touched on, you know, spend management is a simple way to start offering advisory services to your clients. You know, it's an easy conversation to have about, do you want to control the money leaving your business? Yes. Do you want to make it easier for people to actually be able to make payments, but do you want more control of them, but types of payments that can be made by your employees? You know, the answer typically on all of those is yes. So actually, it's an easy way to start that conversation. But the last thing on here, app advisory, it should always start with the client needs. If you start having an app conversation with a client, which is, hey, you know, you need this product, that's not the conversation to have. It's about what are your problems that you're facing, thinking about it holistically and understanding how the apps can work collaboratively to actually solve those problems. That's how you build an app stack and an advisory service, rather than just saying, right, I want to sell this product to this client.
Great, thanks for that, Darren. So just as we wrap up, everybody, Soldo is free for your practice. So there is no cost for you to get set up, use the product in your own firm. It's the best way to test any app solution. How does it work for you before you begin rolling it out to your clients, as well as discounted pricing for your clients. So do drop Darren or Lee a line if you want to make the most of that opportunity. I want to thank Darren and Lee for joining us on the session. So thank you for that. Have we got any questions here? ease of access into a Soldo payment card, bank by each individual transaction. Eddie, I'm not sure whether that's a question on.
Do you want me to answer that? I think
Go for it. Yeah.
So Soldo supports faster payments. So the way in which it works is you transfer money from your company bank account into a Soldo company wallet. You then can distribute funds to individual user wallets if you're using the Soldo Pro product. So each individual user has their own wallet, and then what you can do is you can set automatic rules to actually make sure that those users have enough money to be able to do their job. So a good example of that is I always have a minimum balance of £500 on my card, which means that what happens is that as soon as I drop below that figure, it will automatically top up from the company wallet to that amount. And then any alerts in terms of low balance alerts can be set for at the company level or at the individual user level as well. All of those transactions, and we have one bank feed, just to be really clear, we have one bank feed into Xero rather than multiple. So on that bank feed, what we have is the name on the card for each transaction. We also have the last 4 digits of the card as well for each transaction as well, so you can easily reconcile between the two. And then what happens is you've got full reporting to understand what's been spent by who, which can be reported individually within Soldo, but also you see all that information within Xero or QuickBooks as well.
Great. And down question from Marie, is there any kind of approval process for the spending?
Not at the moment, but what we do is we set effectively preemptive controls to basically say that a user can spend X amount. So for example, you could say that a particular user can spend a maximum of £50 a day or £100 a day or £50 in one transaction or whatever it might be. So effectively what you're doing is creating the rules within the policy or your expenses policy within the actual rules that you set up and budgets that you set up for individual users.
Yeah, and just to extend on that, Marie, we run certainly for one of our clients, we're running Soldo alongside Receipt Bank and Approval Max. So we have purchase controls within Approval Max as well as the controls around spending within Soldo. So it is possible to make that solution work, and feel free to drop us a line if you need any kind of help and support on how that works. I think that's all the questions. We're a few minutes over, so thank you everybody for hanging in there with us. Thank you again to Darren and Lee for joining us this morning. Delighted to have Soldo as App of the Month for August. If anybody does have any questions following the webinar, drop us a line. Do get in touch with Darren and Lee if you'd like to get Soldo set up in your practice. It's a great solution. We use it, and I'm sure you'll get lots of value from it. So do take them up on that offer. All that's left to say is enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you for joining us on the webinar this morning, and thanks again, Darren and Lee.
Thanks, Phil.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers,
Thanks
bye.
for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.